grateful to be a part of the community whenever I'm invited to participate. So thank you for the opportunity to learn from y'all.
Thanks for that. You know, one of the things that we have to do is we find what is the low budget way of doing things, right? And that's the way we have to go, because it's not low budget. It's usually no budget. But it's the way we can do things. And a colleague of mine from a university in Canada says that we do frugal innovation. I found that name très chic, you know, very frugal innovation, which really means trying to do something with nothing or very little. All right. You know, as while still waiting for some people to join, Silvio, could you just comment on the comment that you were making about the second paper before Stacy and Laurie got here with us?
The numbers, because it's very interesting information. I really don't have access from this kind of information. It's incredible. I read this paper 2 times because it's a very rich and relevant.
Yeah, he's talking about, maybe they don't know where to say in the second paper. It's they don't know in the order that we had them, but it was engaging customers in ethical consumption, Giddens et al. 2016.
No, the information technology research to counter domestic sex.
Oh, so it was not even I knew exactly which one you were talking about.
Sorry, I said the second one, but the first one because it's a very different kind of research, because I don't have access to this kind of information, this kind of research. It's very, very relevant and important.
All right. Okay. Well, the 5, let's say the 5 minutes that we usually wait until we formally start have already passed. I can formally introduce you now to our speakers of today. It's our 16th seminar, which means we went a long way this semester, and we're doing it in a slightly different format. Stacy and Laurie were asking, how should we do that? And I said, why don't you go like in a very, very informal way, like a conversation about the pros and cons of responsible research in information systems. So that's their challenge today. Well, we have Stacy is from Baylor University and Laurie is at the University of North Texas. So the challenge for today is doing this even more informally that they even thought, because with Latin Americans you can never get very formal, right? Feel free to do it the way you wish.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. So just to kind of set the stage, you know, we're exactly doing what Alex mentioned. We're just gonna have a conversation. You get to listen to me and Laurie. You're gonna see we have quite an interesting dynamic, probably than most. I mean, technically I was on her dissertation committee, and so like professor-student and former student relationship, we're hopefully it's enjoyable, and please feel free to slow us down. Especially me, I know I tend to talk fast when I get excited, and responsible research and these topics make me very excited. So please feel free to just put in the chat or just say, hey, Stacy, slow down, you're talking way too fast, and I will do my best to accommodate. Please feel free to ask questions as we go. You can, again, put them in the chat, or you can just speak up, whatever you feel comfortable with. But we kind of have set out some general questions that we'll ask each other as part of this conversation. So we haven't really scripted it, other than maybe some general prompts that we'll, you know, kind of use to set the stage. And then we'll go from there. So that's kind of our plan. So we'll see how this goes. We've never done anything in this style before, but I'm excited. I think it's kind of fun. It was fun for Laurie and I to kind of think through how we might approach this. So we'll just start with some brief introductions of ourselves. So I'll just start since I'm already talking. So I've met many of you before, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Stacie Petter, and Professor of Information Systems and Business Analytics at Baylor University. So I graduated from Georgia State University back in 2006. So I've been in the field for quite some time, but my interest in responsible research really started I was able to kind of take off in the past couple of years, and in large part due to Laurie. And so I definitely attribute a lot of that to kind of conversations we've had, things that I've had interest in, important social topics and important social impacts within information systems. I just never was quite able to figure out how to crack the code of how to actually do research in this way until Laurie and I started really working together. I'm currently at Baylor University. I'm doing this work in responsible research, but I've done work on how to evaluate information systems. I've done work on software project management. I've done a lot of work on research methods. I love research methods. So whether it's quantitative, qualitative, design science, I just want to use the right approach to study whatever it is that I'm interested in. And so I mention this because it's some of the foundation that kind of has led me to be able to do some of this responsible research. I'm kind of building on very traditional applications and research within IS as I'm trying to study these important social implications and social problems. So I'll stop there. I'll turn it over to Laurie. Maybe she can introduce herself.
Yeah, so thank you. So as Stacy mentioned, I did my PhD at Baylor University in Texas, and about halfway through my program, I had already started studying ethical consumption and sustainability. So I was already in this process, and I was very lucky because I've had my mentors and my professors be really supportive of that kind of research. So 2 years into it, I'm learning more and more about trafficking and forced labor and supply chains as I start studying ethical supply chains. And then Stacy joins the faculty at Baylor 2 years into my program. And so we get to talking about things that interest us, and she comes on and she's very supportive of my research. And we talked one day after a presentation, and we realized we had this, we've done work in, and Stacy was already interested in working with a nonprofit that worked with trafficking victims. And so we knew back then, and I think it was 2016, right, Stacy, that we talked?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so we talked about this and wanted to do research in it. So that was back in 2016, and we thought, we just don't know how to make this work with information systems. So I ended up finishing my program. I graduated in 2017 and went to be an assistant professor in Illinois. And while I was there, I heard about a company using technology to help investigate and detect human trafficking, and reached out to Stacy, and she kind of gave us the courage to just reach out to this company and ask more about what they were doing. I was a little more apprehensive. I was like, I don't know if they'll even talk to us. And Stacy was like, let's just do it. Let's just form an email and send it to them if we want to do this. So I really attribute that to her. And so then I ended up moving back to the University of North Texas. But during that time, we reached out to a company and started right away doing this research with programs they were running to train law enforcement on how to use technology to detect and investigate human trafficking. So we were in there pretty quick working together. So we did that for about a year almost. We were collecting data, and then we started writing up results. So the responsible research has just kind of started tumbling into our laps, I feel like, since that time. So, but that's the work I'm doing. I love doing the trafficking research, but I love how it relates to supply chains and information in supply chains. And that's just been a really interesting topic for me to explore.
And so just to provide some context to the group, some of you might have been at the ESLA presentation that I did a couple months ago, and some of you might not have been able to join us for that. But let me kind of just set the stage of what we mean by responsible research for those of you who might not be familiar with this term. But there's a growing push by a couple of different organizations. So there's one called Responsible Research in Business and Management. There's another one, Responsible Research Innovation Networked Globally, that are international organizations that are trying to bring together academics, accrediting bodies, industry stakeholders to talk about how do we do research that not only makes an academic impact, but also makes a broader impact beyond the academic community. So how do we reach businesses? How do we reach societal goals? How do we address the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals? Like how do we do more with what we're doing in academia beyond just talking to ourselves? That's really kind of this big push among the responsible research groups that exist. And so these are the group I'm most familiar with. I'm a member of both groups, but Responsible Research in Business and Management. Their acronym, or if you want to check them out online, it's rrbm.network. But this particular group, they're pretty active in the United States, but they also have a lot of global constituents as well. Their summits will involve people from around the world. If you're at an organization, if you're at a university that has AACSB accreditation, you might have learned that there's new requirements to demonstrate impact with research. That's due to the RRBM network group. That actual responsible research organization helped push that new accrediting standard to AACSB. Like they partnered with them to do that. So if you're now kind of going, how do we apply these impact standards? For those of you who are professors at your university, you can thank kind of this group and this push for responsible research as to doing that. But it's this idea that we need to go beyond just the immediate classroom. We need to go beyond talking to ourselves. We need to make a broader impact to the world around us than just within our own academic community. So I'll pause there. I'm just going to ask, does anyone have any questions at this point about kind of what is responsible research? Does that hopefully set a stage before we just kind of get into how Laurie and I, some of our challenges and pros and cons of this?
Stacy, the first time you talked about responsible research, I was thinking that the whole thing was about ethics. And then I noticed that it was, you're doing something that was much more profound, even more profound than that. Of course, it involves ethics pretty much, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the differences between those two things.
Yeah, that's a great point. So ethics is certainly involved with it, because if you're going to make an impact beyond just academia, if you're going to make an impact to business or to society or to the larger collective, you have to think about those ethical approaches. But it's not just about, it's kind of thinking about your research and its impact to the greater good. And so there are ethical considerations that Laurie and I have had to consider in our research. So for example, there's some work we're doing right now. We actually are working on a revision to a paper where we're talking about people being blamed online. And in some of the initial work that we did, we were using Twitter posts or like actual events and names of people that have experienced online abuse. And these are in the public domain. There's news articles written about them. But we started getting some pushback and realizing that, we do have a responsibility not to perpetuate online abuse or sharing these stories that people have been victimized by. So we now are using more fictitious scenarios to kind of illustrate ideas, because there's kind of these other layers of kind of ethical communication and ethical reporting of what we're doing. So there's kind of these just additional things that we're kind of thinking about that I think also plays into doing responsible research. It's not just addressing societal goals, but making sure the way in which we conduct our research and we write up our research and communicate those results are done so in an ethical and appropriate way. And Laurie, you might have more examples too through like your work on supply chains and other aspects.
Yeah, I think the responsible research kind of gave a broader context, because typically our research in the business school, the first thing they ask you is, okay, what's the business relevance? How does this help business like make money? And so you take in ethics, but responsible research brings in these other stakeholders, which are society, which are the impact on society at large and the users, not just the business and their profit margin. So some of the stuff we study, like with online abuse or even with trafficking, we have to think about it's counterproductive to their business model. Some of the things that we are suggesting and studying, because we don't want things perpetrated or shared online, especially in abusive context, or we don't want people to be able to just use technology to exploit people. But that may mean that the businesses have, need to put in more restrictions, right? And that can mean less money coming in for them. So I think the responsible research in business, I love that, because it's not just the ethics of what to do for the, for the shareholders, but now we're able to expand it, to me, that's responsible to the community at large and the users at large.
And maybe a plug-in to that, Laurie and Stacy, is, of course, when you're becoming more, when you're doing responsible research, it's responsible. It's what you consider to be responsible. So you become much more active, right? And activism always brings some, well, it brings our own ideas. It brings our own lenses to see the problem. And of course, when we see the problems through our lenses, we may be neglecting other ways of seeing the world as well. So I don't know, maybe in your talk, if you can reflect a little bit about where or in which situations our activism, our willingness to do goods does not end up stopping at a place where we notice that others are trying to do good in a different way, and there is room there where we will have to discuss and figure out what is good for everyone, and not just from our perspective, let's say. I don't know if you ever got to a situation like that, but I understand, at least in this world where we live today, where people live in their own echo chambers and everyone thinks that they are right, I understand that we'll start clashing against other people that are also trying to do good, but their good and our good need to somehow live together.
Stacy, I don't know, with working in the human trafficking space, there's a lot of different approaches. And so Stacy and I...
Oh, and besides, you're working in something that is so radically, it's so difficult to claim that a different view to that would
You'd be surprised. I think this is a great example, Laurie. So yeah.
I feel like, Stacy, I want you to talk about that, because when we first got in to this, we were like, oh, okay, I can see their approach. Is it to reduce harm or what have you? But there is a lot of different approaches, and I think we kind of have to tiptoe around, not trying to take on one view or the other. But Stacy she and I really had to talk about this when we first got in the field, so to speak.
So I think even in the field of sex trafficking, there's different ways that people are researching this and different ways that people are addressing the problem. So one would even be whether or not sex trafficking is a legitimate issue to be discussed. So there are scholars in our field or in business who do studies on sex work. And so one thing that we've run up against is when we are talking about trafficking, and when we talk about human trafficking, we're talking about individuals who are being compelled, if we're talking about sex trafficking, to perform sexual services, or if it's labor trafficking, to perform labor through force, fraud, or coercion. Now, there are a group of people around the world who engage in sex work, who are not compelled to engage in sex work. We are not putting a value judgment on sex work. We're not trying to say whether that's good or bad or exploitative. We are only focusing on the issue of force, fraud, and coercion. And you would think that that would be simple enough, that there's not other lines that would be drawn there. But I can remember a paper that we submitted to a conference where we quoted a survivor of trafficking who said in the article, "I was raped multiple times a day." We were called activists for quoting this statement, which from a survivor perspective, that is what the survivor experienced. She was being forcibly raped multiple times a day on behalf of her trafficker. But again, when there's people who view the phenomenon more of, well, I'm interested in how the economic activity, the financial transactions of the activity from a sex work perspective, they don't acknowledge that maybe there are people who are raped or trafficked as a result. So that's one issue we've come up against, and we've had to remove some of the more, I don't know, maybe we were called activists. I mean, I want to say inflammatory, but it's not. I mean, this was a direct quote from someone saying that was her perspective. I don't feel like that's inflammatory. I feel like that's her perspective. So for us to negate that perspective, to me, that's wrong. But it seems like there are a few pockets of people in certain disciplines that maybe disagree with that perspective, or even with how we identify interventions on how we might use technology to fight human trafficking. Like Laurie mentioned, there's some people who really focus on removing victims from trafficking scenarios, which is really important, right? We don't want individuals to be forcibly raped multiple times a day. We want to remove the victim from the situation. Others say, well, we should spend more attention focusing on removing the trafficker, because otherwise you just have more victims that come through the trafficking pipeline. Some people are focused on, we need to focus on arrests and making sure we have as many arrests that happen as possible for traffickers. Some people say we should arrest the sex workers, because in the United States that's prostitution and that's illegal. There's actually a lot of disagreement about the legality and the best ways of addressing this problem, or even are trafficking victims, should they be arrested for prostitution or for drug abuse if they're addicted to drugs, even if they were a victim of trafficking? It's to this point of like, from whose perspective, are you being responsible? It is something that is really challenging. And I think there's certain places where we don't claim anything. Like we're only focused on, for example, the trafficking perspective, not the sex work perspective. We're trying to stay out of that piece of it. But we're having to, I think, learn a lot from other people in various perspectives and decide at what point do we weigh in, or do we just report, here are different approaches to address trafficking. I think that's part of what makes this kind of a complex topic or type of research to perform.
Yeah, and we've had a couple of times where, we've talked to individuals in the field, whether they're involved on the technology side, maybe they're a technology company, or maybe they're involved in financial transactions that happen online. And we have come across things where I tell Stacy, I'm like, I'm really disgusted that people do this and that I feel like they're taking advantage. So definitely we've come across things where I have an opinion, but that doesn't, I think that inspires us to keep working, but we're not trying to, be activists necessarily in our work. We're really just trying to understand the logistics of how technology is being used, good or bad, in these scenarios. But we've definitely come across things, which I'm sure you do in business, where you go, what, is this really what we're doing? I don't know that this is ethical, but it definitely pushes against that line. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask Laurie a question. And so Laurie, you started in responsible research before it was called that, and with your dissertation work before I even met you. You were already moving down this path before we met. So what prompted you to study? So your initial work, as you mentioned, was on ethical consumption, and one of her papers was shared for today. So how did you get started down this path?
Okay, so before I went back for my PhD, I got my master's degree, and I worked for about 10 years in the nonprofit sector. So I come from a nonprofit, being familiar with not-for-profits and a lot of different, interventions in society to help societal problems. Anyway, so when I applied for Baylor, I had been at Baylor before to get my master's degree, so I was able, when I interviewed, to talk very frankly with the program director about the kind of research I was interested in, and she was as well. So I think I just picked the right place, and that I was able to move in. And Dorothy Leidner was there at Baylor, and she really kind of introduced me, because she knew that I had that background in nonprofit. She kind of introduced me to this area coming up where I could kind of apply my interest. So she is really, I credit her for getting me on the road of ethical consumption, because we were studying sustainability, but I had not even heard the term ethical consumption until I was almost a year into this research, before those terms started coming out. The UN Sustainable Development Goals had not been developed yet. And so, so that's how I got into down that path, and I just stuck with it. But I will say it was great to have that support by Stacy and by Dorothy Leidner, who I was working with. But I got a lot of pushback. So being a junior faculty, or being, in as a PhD student, I had several of my colleagues ask me, why aren't you getting your PhD in sociology, or why are you even doing this degree? They don't have to explain themselves, but apparently I was supposed to explain myself on why I had this interest, even though our interest was in technology. So I got pushback about that. I had some other professors tell me that this was a very uninteresting topic, and why did I want to do this? I mean, it was not good. So when Stacy came, it was just nice to have another person being supportive. So then I felt like I had two kind of allies who were very supportive and encouraging about my interest, and theirs as well. And so it hasn't been easy. And then I feel like I just get momentum, more and more support. I'm doing my dissertation on ethical consumption, and then I go out on the job market and I'm doing job talks at different universities. And Stacy knows this. I had a couple of doozies where it was just, they were really concerned that I would not be able to get this research published. And that was the big pushback. So I think it actually maybe kept me from getting a couple of offers from universities, to where they, when I presented my work, the people in the business school were not very receptive of it. There were only a few universities where they were receptive.
Laurie, what was their argument for that? Because I mean, you see, when Stacy talked about this for the first time at ISLA, I know the reception was great. I mean, everyone was really enthusiastic about the idea over here. It may be because it was completely new to us, but I just wonder what would be the reasons for them to think that this was not publishable.
I don't know. I mean, maybe Stacy can answer that question better, since I feel like I was this naive person coming into the field going, we're going to do all this good, right? And I get out there, because they say information systems is in the business school. You need to be talking about what this has to do with business. And by explaining that business is the way that forms society, that there are things that businesses do that hurt society, was not a meaningful argument, I think. I mean, I think hearing what I was researching from people like Stacy, who is more established in the field, or from, other professors that are more established, I think they would take it. But I don't know. I just had a really negative response. I only had a couple of schools that were like, this is really great. So, it was kind of like being pushed out there. I had all the support at Baylor, and then I got pushed out there and nobody was having it.
The reason I ask you that is that we have a colleague here at my university that studies logistics, and the object of his study is concentration camps in Germany, the Second World War. And basically what he's trying to do is show that logistics happens the same way. And if your problem is you have to get rid of, let's say, waste, that's a huge problem for. And so he uses the absurd of the situation to even show, to explore it in a way that it becomes, I mean, sometimes I think it's probably difficult for you to do research in some of these environments, because the environments are depressing to some extent. And I mean, and that's something that maybe you two could talk about a little also. But except for that, I mean, it's the object of your study. You're still studying information systems, and you may find very interesting results there that would probably be maybe even more difficult to find in a different object, or at least in another object that would be what everyone would expect, right? I don't know.
Agreed. Yeah. What about you, Stacy? You've been doing this a lot longer.
So what I think, kind of the reason I think Laurie received pushback, this is the world according to Stacie Petter, and I know I'm being recorded, but I'll still say it. I think there's a lot of people within the information systems field that are very conservatively minded, in that they're not risk seeking, right? They're very risk averse. And so the thought of something that is outside kind of this very narrow box of what is information systems can be a scary proposition, especially if you're thinking about whether or not a person can publish enough in order to get tenure at a university, when you only know one model within this very little box of how to publish. And I can say this from some, not personal experience, but one of my dearest friends, her name is Adrienne Randolph. Some of you might know her, but she does brain-computer interaction research. And we went through Georgia State together. We started at the same cohort. And her work was fascinating. She used brain-computer interaction, so basically putting skull caps on people who have locked-in syndrome, meaning they're cognitively intact, so they're fully functioning mentally, but they cannot move their body. And so using brain-computer interaction to help them communicate with the world. And back in 2006, 2007, when she was on the job market, people were asking her, why are you doing healthcare research in a business school? Now, if you think about healthcare research today, no one questions the business implication and the financial implication and why we do healthcare research from a business perspective. But in 2007, you know, there were these questions that she would get about, why is this information systems research? Why is this business school research? And I think we're just kind of sometimes slow as a field, or we make these sweeping generalizations. I can't tell you how many times I've heard in the past, especially 3 to 5 years, behavioral information systems research is dead. It's all econometrics. It's all big data. That's the only research that can and should be published from now on. And again, speaking the Stacie Petter philosophy, I think we would be shortchanging ourselves as a field if we declared behavioral research dead as a discipline. And besides, we get to say what's alive and dead in our discipline. We are the editors, we are the reviewers, right? There's not just this one person that is the gatekeeper of everything within our discipline. We can choose what's alive and what's dead. And I think sometimes as academics, we give up our power and autonomy to these institutional structures, whether they're journals, whether they're university politics, whatever that might be. And we don't claim the power that we have. If we think something is interesting and we think it belongs in IS, we have the power to claim it's in IS, and we have the power to claim that it's of value and we should publish it. But I think we forget that as scholars along the way. So I think that's why sometimes we can be a bit slow as a field. Even though we're a field that's all about innovation and studying innovation, we can be slow to adopt some of those innovations ourselves. I think in part, maybe it has to do with we struggle to have legitimacy for so long as a discipline. And there's been this kind of history where we feel as information systems, we're not as sophisticated or as strong as management or marketing or some of the other core disciplines within business. So I don't know if that's what causes it, but I think that's why Laurie had some of those struggles on the market, were those issues. And then to Alex, your other point about kind of the depressingness of the topic, it's interesting because whenever people ask me, like, what are you studying? And I'll tell them, my passion project right now is how we can use information technology to fight human trafficking. The answers I usually get are, wow, that's really interesting. And then I sometimes get, that sounds really depressing. And I'm like, no, we're fighting human trafficking. Like, that's the exciting part. Like, we get to try to fix a problem, right? So you flip it, right? I can't do the depressing part. I am so grateful we have people in social work and sociology and other disciplines that can work with victims. I can't. My heart would break too much to do that. But I can be super excited every day that I'm on the side with the good guys trying to make a difference in the world. Like, there's no depression associated with that. That is super exciting and rejuvenating. But I think I get different responses, though, in part because I'm Stacie Petter, and people who know me, well, first of all, I am known to some extent by people. People who know me know that I kind of march to a different drum than a lot of other people. So I do kind of things in my own way. But Laurie, you tend to get a completely different reaction, don't you, whenever you talk to people about your work? So I don't know if you would mind sharing kind of what you tend to hear.
I think we've covered some of it. I tend to get some negative reactions a little bit, and some of it just involves trying to educate people, but I get a lot of the, even recently, I mean, I have been presenting some of our work, and people in the field have said, well, you're not going to get this published. And I'm like, it already is. Like we just said, this is, this was just accepted and stuff like that. So I think, I don't know. I don't have the credibility yet to show that this work can get published. But to overcome that, a lot of now when we put out, there's more and more like special track. There's more and more tracks now at conferences. There's more groups that you can get involved with. So like with AIS Social Inclusion, with the AIS Women's Network, and then usually HICS or the AIS conferences have like a social impact type of track now. And there's more and more special issues in our top journals, looking for work that addresses these societal problems. So that to me has just really started snowballing in the last 2 or 3 years. And so we've been putting our work in there in those tracks. And so you get to meet other people who are doing research in a similar area where they're looking at the well-being of society or users. And so I feel like there's a momentum now building up to where there's a lot more reviewers, and I'm getting, asked to do reviews now for papers that I'm like, what a great topic. So I'm getting more involved in that. But that is definitely something that has helped me overcome kind of the negative reactions I get and the negative feedback I get, to be with people who want this work and are being innovative in the field and help you develop that work. It's been really inspiring. So, and Stacy's doing more and more to try to help that work too. So
I'll share a shameless plug. So at ICIS in Austin, so if you're able to attend physically or virtually, there will be a panel on making an impact with in information systems research, and I'm co-moderating that panel. And so we have a great group of people. Tilo Bowman is the other moderator with me. We both serve on the AIS Impact Award Committee. So now AIS actually has an award for impactful research, which is super exciting. The other people on our panel include Michael Roseman from Australia. We have Christina So from Singapore. We have Lynn Marcus. Lynn's on the Impact Award Committee. She's not on the panel. We have Michelle Carter from Washington State University. She's involved in SIG social inclusion. Brian Fitzpatrick is the current AIS president, and Andrew Burton-Jones, who's editor-in-chief of MIS Quarterly. And if you've noticed, even MIS Quarterly, part of Andrew's mission has really been trying to promote and encourage responsible research, impactful research. So I think we're starting to see more momentum in the field of people saying, yes, we should invest in this. These are things that can and should be published. I think we don't see many examples of it yet, or it takes so much time to get these things through the process. And again, we're just trying to be evangelists, right, in that way of kind of sharing that there are influential people in our field who are selecting awards, editors-in-chief of journals, president of our association, that all value impactful research and responsible research, and we're trying to use that platform to inform the community about it. So if you have time, it's Monday afternoon during ICIS. I hope you'll join us in whatever format you can for that panel. So, Laurie, with some of these challenges that you've had, how do you, especially when people are telling you, like, your work isn't interesting, or how are you going to get published? Like, how do you persevere through that? Like, how do you keep going whenever you get a lot of negativity? Because I feel like I don't get the negativity, but you do. And so what drives you to continue? Why not just go an easier path?
I don't know. So usually when that happens, I call you and fuss about it. You're never going to believe what these researchers said to me. Or call, Dorothy Leidner, my dissertation chair, if it's about that kind of work. So you guys have both heard that. So one of the things that's different, and I think that drives different motivations, is that this is really a second career for me. So I'm not, I didn't just get into it, and my drive wasn't to be like, I want to be the top cited researcher or I want to be famous in the field or something. I got into it because I really thought, wow, I think this research and what we're doing can, really benefit society. So I think I just go back to, I chose to do this, and that some people aren't going to like it, but a lot of people are. And I just kind of throw myself into getting the work out, because it's so great when I think about all the people that said this wouldn't get published, and now we're publishing like paper, and now there's more than one, and I'm like, I don't even need to respond. It's out there, it's published, it's helping people. So I just kind of throw myself into it. But I was doing a talk at a university, and then I had a talk with just their PhD students. And I had several women on the call, especially several female PhD students. And they asked me, one of them said, well, I really want to do work. You've done a lot of work in gender studies, in information systems. And they were like, that's what I want to do. But when I asked my dissertation advisor about it, they told me it would just kill my career, that it was career suicide to even do this topic. Which I was like, it was like my first big paper. Like, there's lots of people out there that want this research. So, but my advice to them was to just do whatever you have to do to get your PhD and get out and like get good at it, to learn the skills, to demonstrate that you can conduct research, independent research, quality research, and get your PhD. And then you can go out and do what you want to do. So for those of you who are waiting maybe on tenure or to get through your PhD program to really pursue those things you're really passionate about, just know that the more research you do, the better you get. And so then when you start applying it to the things you love, it really helps. Because I'm glad I didn't pick this up until a few years later, because I just wasn't, I've just learned a lot about what to do and what not to do to mess up studies. So it was a good training ground to be able to do that. So I think that's what I do. If I get negative stuff, I just go, wow, they're just very closed-minded, and we just move along and do our stuff.
Laurie, one thing that mainly our students in Latin America probably are not very aware about is this pressure that you have in the US to get tenured, right? Of course, we do have the same sort of pressures around here, but it's in a different way. For example, here it would be to maybe get a position in a good university. But so it's just to make it clear for our students here, getting tenure is mainly in the United States. The first years of a professor at the university, they still don't have much stability in the job. They probably get a lot of classes to teach, but little possibility to do research and things like that. And after they get tenured, that's when they have more freedom to go on with their research. Just so that people understand what you were talking about when you talk about that.
Yes, sorry about that. Yes, so as a junior faculty, and Stacy, I'll let you talk more about this process, but as a junior faculty, I'm referring to a faculty in the US who is on a, I don't know, what's the best way you would describe it, Stacy?
So it's kind of almost like a probationary period with the university, I would say, where, you know, you're either on a year-to-year contract or maybe a 3-year or 5-year contract where you're having to prove yourself. And if you're at a more research-oriented university, it would be proving yourself in terms of research. And if you're at a more teaching university, it would be more proving yourself in terms of teaching, but still accomplishing some level of research that's required for accreditation purposes. But at that point, they can say at the end of those, basically at the beginning or end of your 6th year, thanks for your time here, but here's your final contract, and we hope you find a great place to go, but it's not here. So you could basically be without a job after 6 years if you don't get tenure at a university. So yeah, I think a probationary period is almost what I would call it.
Yeah, and that's even what it's called in my contract. I don't even know why I didn't think about that, but yeah. And so, and the people that vote on your tenure are the senior people in the department. So when you come into a university and you're doing research on something that they are not familiar with, right? They might, some of them tend to think it's not important for the field. And so that, you know, it goes to the fact that you want your colleagues in your department to see your work as valuable in making a contribution to the information systems field. And that can be difficult sometimes, but now that I have a couple of publications in that area and are moving forward to more, it's definitely brought me a lot more credibility to where they go, okay, we don't really care what you're working on. As long as you're getting published in information systems journals, we'll take you. So that's been my experience as of late.
What other questions are out there for us? How can we help you on your journey or share some of our war stories that might be useful?
I'm sure that Andrea has questions to you, and she would probably say that her advisor was one of those who told her, don't go this track, it's going to be difficult. And by the way, her advisor, that's me.
Well, in fact, I think we just take the advice from our advisors because they are more, how can I say that, more experienced. So, I mean, we just should listen to what they say and try to build their path like in the best way we can. But listening to you talking, Laurie, about, okay, so it doesn't matter what your research is as long as you get published. I mean, it's a little sad, isn't it? Because you make, I mean, look at the research that you do, both of you do. It's so relevant, so important. And I mean, you know, as long, yes, hurtful, yes. I mean, what if you didn't get published? I mean, does it make your research less relevant? No, it doesn't at all. So how do you feel it? How do you face it? Because it's basically, it seems to me that there are more women in this topic that you research. I don't know if just an impression. And how do you feel about it? I mean, do you just enter the game and just do it, or how do you feel about it?
So I've really relied on, this is where I've really leaned on Stacy to help. If it were up to me, I would just stay in the field and do research and write some report and not even worry about writing it up for publication. But I have to keep my job. So the job, it's kind of a cycle, but to do this work that I love, I have to have a job at a university. So if I've kind of centered where I work. I have changed institutions, and I had several reasons for changing institutions, but one of them is I wanted to go to a school that actually did value our work, because we've gotten grants, national grants for this. And so it's actually kind of determined where I go. And I don't care if I'm at a top school or a regular school. I mean, I'm really driven by, I want to go where I can have a job in a university where I can do this work, because I'm internally motivated, intrinsically motivated to do the work. So it just so happens, why I feel like I'm so lucky is because I've worked with people like Stacy and other scholars who have said, this is really interesting work. Here's what you could do, and help me find a way to make that publishable and to get the work out there. I feel like I've really had Stacy to help me push that, and bring the National Science Foundation thing that we grant that we have. That's all Stacy found that and was like, we should do this. And I was like, that seems crazy. Sure, let's try it. So, but it is something that I have thought about, and I'm not going to let the research go, for my job. If I didn't get tenure, I had already kind of made up in my mind, I'll have to get a job somewhere else. And that's just what I'll have to do. But it is, especially I can, kind of do things that are important to me. Because again, this is a second career. If I wanted to I could go back in industry, but I'm really passionate about this. But I am trying to work the system where my job really supports this work. And it's tricky. You got to find somewhere that fits. So I don't know how Stacy stays motivated. She's always seems to be motivated to push forward.
Well, I think given where I'm at in my career, I mean, I'll be honest, I was trained in a very traditional approach. I mean, I had very traditional topics. They were things that I was passionate about. I mean, my dissertation research, which no one actually seems, it's not what you think my dissertation research was about. It's about software project management. No one knows me for that. They know me for other things. But that was something I was really passionate about at the time, but it was a very traditional research topic. I was working on other very traditional research topics. And to be honest, I just played the game, right? You play the game that you are told to play, and those were the rules of the game that I had at the time. And once you hit this point where you either have credibility in the field or you have job security, whether that's tenure or going to a national university or whatever that means for you, or you're just comfortable in your own skin, I think it also just took me some time to be kind of just, yeah, I do things different than a lot of folks in the field. And I've had to come to terms of being okay with that. Because I'm not going to have the same career as some folks I graduated with. That's okay. I'm going to have my career and I'm going to feel good about it. But there are times where I play the game. And even with this research, we still play the game. So the paper we published in Information Systems Journal, it is a very mainstream IS paper, right? It's in the context of trafficking, but it's not really the passion, I think, that both Laurie and I have about trafficking, but we played the game to get it in the journal. And so I think part of it is kind of learning, how do you navigate the rules of the game to get what you want out of it, but still find the way to be successful within the constraints that you have within the field. And sometimes it's, okay, for a short time, I will listen to my advisor's advice, or I will do what I have to do at my university to get to the next stage. And then I have freedom to explore other things. And that can be okay. I think if you feel like your entire life is set up that way and you never will have freedom, you don't want to be on that path too long, right? Where if it's your entire life, you're waiting for that next reason to do what you want to do. But there are times you might just have to, kind of play the game in a different way, or just make sure that you take care of yourself. Because I think if I just said, well, who cares about the system? I'm just going to do it my way. We would not have gotten that paper published, and we would have had a harder time getting some of the successes that we've had. So I think you have to figure out how to navigate that.
and you wouldn't be here talking to us and
Exactly.
showing us this amazing work that you do. I mean, so we have to play the game. I mean, anywhere you work, everywhere you work. I mean, if you're in a company, in a business, whatever, you have to play the game. Yes, very nice. Thank you and congratulations for your work. It's really important, really amazing.
Thank you so much.
Renata?
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Stacy, Laurie, thank you very much for being here with us today. You are very inspiring. Since I met Stacy at Isla, I felt like, oh, I'm not alone anymore. I learned about the term responsible research. I believe that sometimes I try to do responsible research, and I found it very, very, very good to know that now I can have references that I can use to argue about the research that we do. And just to ask you one little thing, before I have a student that once she was presenting her work for a teacher in a course, and her work was not even responsible research. It was just a kind of qualitative case study. And then the professor said something to her like this: "Oh, please don't do this, girl, because you are opening the gates of hell." You know, that was the term he used for her. And I really appreciate knowing that you have reference that can help us argue against this kind of argument. Okay?
Renata, you're appreciative that they have opened the gates to hell.
Yes. And we can follow now. And I do believe, Alexandre, that doing research about logistics in a concentration camp is completely different from doing a research to fight against prejudice, you know. So that is what responsible research is. And from my point of view, what I like...
I was definitely not saying that his research intended to be responsible research. I was just saying that in business, I mean, we can, that's a problem that, for example, Andrea, she's always concerned. She's a journalist, and she says, does this fit a business school? And I said, well, if we trust that it does, we will make it fit, right? And because and besides, if you find interesting different objects that others are not studying, that's also great. One thing that Stacy and Renata, I mean, you know each other already from Isla, but you're let's say two of the most pragmatic people that I know, in research. But it's very important that we find ways of turning what we want to do into something that others will accept us to do, because otherwise we'll be banging our head against the wall. And I don't blame a professor that says, don't go that way, if he doesn't think that he's strong enough to lead that way, or if he thinks that his students may not be aware of the challenges. But at the same time, when I say that you two are very pragmatic taking this track, it is because I think that this is a how do they call it? A blue ocean, right? I mean, there is very little competition and a lot of interest of our society, and therefore also of other researchers, for research that becomes that shows that it's relevant, because we all have that feeling that many times we're doing a little bit more of the same simply to please the system.
Yes, that's the problem, because when we go to other research fields, for instance, education, we can find a lot of responsible research over there. Just to tell a name, Paulo Freire is completely responsible research from my point of view. But what I would like to ask you is that sometimes I find the students that are really willing to do this kind of responsible research, or more, with more engagement and to be involved into the research. But sometimes I feel like a little bit afraid of putting my student into a kind of overload work, you know. So you have to do your literature review, you have to do all the methodological stuff, and you still have to be responsible with social responsible, you know. And sometimes I feel like, why should I do that to this student, you know? So I would like to hear a little bit about you, if you have any experience on that. And another, and just to finish, I would say that what the best argument for me for doing responsible research is that this kind of research makes me better as a human being. It has nothing to do with publishing papers of, you know, positions. It has to do with turning me a better person. I don't know if you share with me this feeling. Thank you very much. You too. You are like Wonder Woman for me, okay? Thank you a lot.
So I'll chime in a little bit on this, and then I'm sure Laurie has a lot of experience about opening the gates of hell through doing qualitative research for a dissertation. But so, you know, I say whenever, like, for example, I'm working with a PhD student right now, and she's interested in understanding how people from marginalized communities can express themselves and gain support, social support online and through social media. And she's someone who has a lot of passion for this topic because she's lived it. And she's someone who is just has a lot of grit and perseverance and kind of has that fortitude to kind of push through on a tougher topic. And so for someone like her, I'm happy to kind of champion her and support her down that path. There would be other students that if they were to approach me about a topic in this area, I would be more skeptical, in part because I might question their motivation or question their, I think there is we're starting to, now that there's beginning to be some talk about impactful or responsible research, kind of folks who want to hang on to the topic because they think it will be the next big thing, but they don't necessarily have a commitment towards it. And that I have concerns about when that happens. I think it could negatively impact responsible research moving forward. So I don't want to encourage that. But I also, you know, you need that student who has that kind of strength, a thicker skin to be able to put up with those negative comments like Laurie has experienced over the years, or the skeptical folks that, you know, in terms of how they might treat research, or knowing that they have to go and above and beyond. So if they're looking at what their colleagues are doing, and their colleagues are able to scrape some data from a website, push out this big data project, and now they have a publication, that is not probably going to be a quick publication path. Doing a responsible research project is going to be slower, but it hopefully will be something that gets you up every day and excited to do your work every day, and maybe makes you feel like a better human every day. But you're doing it for a different reason than just that publication, or just, you know, checking a box in the field or whatever it might be. And so there would be students I would probably advise, don't go down this path because they're not prepared for it, they're not ready for it. I think it's kind of identifying who are those right students and people. And it's not that someone can't learn it. So I'm not saying that, you know, well, if you're not there today, you should never do it. But I think it has to be the right project at the right time for the right person in order to really get the same kind of energy that I know I get from this type of project.
Thank you. I don't know if Laurie wants to comment on something.
No, I think Stacy, I really appreciate what Stacy said about, I didn't even think about it because I'm just doing the work we're doing, but that responsible research will become like a fad or a trend, and people will not get as involved. I come from a qualitative research background, so I did get pushback on that, even though, you know, I've done both. But I tend to like the other because I like to do field work and I like to understand a phenomenon really well. And that does not bode well for speed as far as getting publications out, because it takes longer. It takes a lot more time and energy to get involved in a qualitative research project. But now that Stacy has brought that up, we talked about this last week, that, you know, I think people are going to see responsible research as something we need to be doing. And then we don't really have a good outline of, here's the best how to do responsible research to ensure that you are making an impact and to assess whether you are making an impact. I think that might be something that we have to address in the future, because it hadn't crossed my mind that it would just be something that people do just as a line on a resume, and not that they're not really into it. And you know, I came into this to get my PhD with a background in nonprofit. So, you know, I had a decade of experience in working in these kinds of causes. So it was kind of natural for me to go that way, but I can see where it's a foreign concept to other people, and we're just not trained, you know, to do that in the business school or in engineering and stuff. These fields we're coming out of, we're not really trained on that either. So, but I think that's going to be important to address moving forward.
Thank you too, Laurie.
Yeah. Stacy, you want to talk about the amount of time we've spent in the field and what it's meant to do this responsible research? Because it's been quite time consuming.
It has. I mean, so what's interesting, you know, Laurie mentioned earlier, you know, at the start of this conversation, how, you know, she found this organization that did work on human trafficking and using technology for human trafficking. And, you know, we were like, well, let's just call them up and, reach out and see if they'll let us join in. So we basically sent an email. Probably within a week, we were on a phone call with them. And in that phone call, they're like, well, we have a training coming up in May. This was April, like mid-April, we're having a phone call with the organization. And they said, we have a training coming up in May. You want to come in and listen to the training? And so we're like rearranging our lives to try to figure out how to go through this 7-day training to just sit in and be a fly on the wall. And then we did this actually 3 times, where we went to these 5 or 7-day trainings to listen how all of this, how basically try to understand how they train law enforcement to fight human trafficking using technology. And so honestly, I think I could not imagine a better way to start. I don't know that we would have gotten the insight so quickly than just by having this massive brain dump on us in this very immersive 7-day period. I had to leave for part of it because I was already scheduled to be at another conference during that time, but basically to have both of us there almost the entire period so we could both learn and absorb as much as possible. It was so important to do that. And then we followed up with lots of interviews. I think Laurie spent, can't tell you, I mean, I don't know how many hours you spent interviewing people that fall in particular after we went to these trainings to understand their perspectives. But, it was a significant investment in time and in resources. So luckily for a couple of the trainings, they were an 1.5-hour drive away from me. So it wasn't as much of an investment, but Laurie had to fly to these locations. We had to still get hotels. We had to beg our department chairs for some funds to support it. We had to get really creative and, split Airbnbs in order to make it happen. I mean, it was a pretty intense process to try to scale up and learn what we needed to learn, but I can't think of any better way than what we did. And we didn't plan it that way. We were very fortunate. The organization just kind of opened their arms to us and just let us have free reign and learn everything we could from them. And so it's just been phenomenal in terms of how we were able to get invested, but it wasn't something we planned for. We're just very fortunate it worked out the way it did. But yeah, it was a lot of time in the field to get the understanding, and hopefully we'll ramp up and turn all this into even more publications. But Laurie's right, it's a slow burn. It takes a long time to get enough knowledge to where you feel like you can write publications, and then hopefully those will start to come quicker now because we don't have to do that field work, or we've already done it, but we have a lot of data to analyze, a lot of things to process and consider.
And there's been some I mean, we laugh about it now. I think you have to have a good sense of humor, but there has just been more than I experience in general, case studies with businesses. This has just been a unique challenge in that we have awkward experiences, people that don't want to talk to us. Stacy came back to one of the trainings we were at with this organization. So we're there with 20 law enforcement, local, state, and federal law enforcement officials, and some of them would talk to me and some of them would not. And so I would be like, Stacy, maybe you can make a way to talk to people and stuff like that. So it's been, people don't understand what you're doing. They haven't ever worked with researchers before. So it's been, you have all that to where when you're just dealing with data, you don't have that people side of it. When you're dealing with qualitative data, the data are the people that you're getting it from. And so it's been worth it to work through all those challenges to get the information that we know about the phenomenon, because I think you can't do responsible research unless you really understand who the stakeholders are, what is happening to victims, what is happening to companies who are trying to do this, what are the legal implications, who are the people trying to fight this already, what are the obstacles they're coming up against. So it's a lot harder to enter into a conversation of a phenomenon than it is to enter the conversation kind of, okay, what research has already been conducted, just to go out in the field and find that. So I would say it's worth it though, because eventually when you start getting that work out, now we're able to assess what is really important right now. What are these issues in trafficking and technology that we can really make the biggest impact with, because the problems are so big, societal problems are so complex. But I think it was worth working through and spending the time, because we are really meeting people and figuring out how we can try to actually make an impact and make a dent in trafficking. So.
And that triggered maybe a suggestion of something I would recommend maybe as a best practice, which would be try not to go this alone, have a buddy. Because Laurie's exactly right. Like, I remember those times where she'd come up to me like, yeah, can you talk to this person? They're not clicking with me. And we also Laurie and I are very complementary in terms of our skill sets. Like, we have enough overlap where we can still communicate and work well with one another. But to be honest, I'm this taskmaster and introvert, and I'm very content to be behind my computer writing papers and doing things. And Laurie is that person who will she's a social butterfly. She'll go out and she just talks to strangers. And that's the scariest thing you could ask me to do, is talk to a bunch of strangers, but she'll just go do it. And she's able to extract a lot of information from people in an interview. While I don't always, we just think differently and we approach things differently. And so I think during those times where it has been challenging, or just being able to kind of bounce ideas off one another, or just have kind of that support system, I think not going it alone can be helpful. Or even if you are the lone person on your responsible research project, knowing someone else who's doing their own responsible research project so you can at least bounce ideas off them, I think could be really helpful as well. Andrea, I see your hands raised.
Yes, I have a question for Laurie. It's about the paper that we read. I was curious, did you get to do that PTS? Did you get to put that in practice in some products, or how did it develop?
Yeah, so the paper we sent out, you're talking about the product traceability?
Yeah.
Okay. So I studied what a lot of what I call digital social entrepreneurs had already produced. So really I was studying, okay, there's all these apps out there that we can have on our phones to find out if products are working. I did talk to so I talked to several developers and also users. I did share my results from my dissertation with both of those, you know, users and other. But I didn't create anything. So I didn't create anything and put it out there. But I've been, you know, even since I've done my dissertation work, several of those have not been able to be updated. They don't get the funding they need. So I still feel like there's a lot of work to do in that area to get more people to use them. Because they've come in and out, you know, because a lot of these people have other jobs. They work at tech companies, and then they've done this on the side. I mean, they work at like Microsoft and Amazon and stuff like that. So some of them have thrived where others have just not, to me, just haven't made tons of success as far as seeing a difference in behavior. I think a lot of that comes from external things as well. Pushes for sustainability, whether it's through offering different products and having different, you know, pushes to do that, to consume ethically. Now it's more in the US. Unfortunately, like, we're slow to the game with ethical consumption, but there's a lot more emphasis on that now, and there's a lot more ethical products being offered. So you see it now mentioned in commercials, to me, a lot more commercials and stuff like that. So I think all that's giving it a little momentum to be more transparent in the ethicality of products in general. But no, I wasn't able to build one ourselves and test it out.
It's such a great idea, because when I read it, while I was reading it, I thought, okay, this is good to fight against greenwashing, right?
Yes.
Where the companies, they say they do stuff for the environment, but they don't. So if that solution was out there, I mean, you could just fight greenwashing.
And I will send you, I need to get your email. I'll send you, because this was in my dissertation, not in what we sent you. But I mean, there's about 30 or 40 apps out there. Some of them work in North and South, Central and South America. Some of them work in Europe. I mean, it just depends where you are. But there's a lot more out there. And then there's some websites now that you can go to, and they are required to give you information about their ethical supply chain. So that's becoming more and more common by law. The thing is, it's kind of search intensive, because you have to go to the website and try to find.
Yeah, and I mean, they make it difficult for us to find this information. This is what I feel. I mean,
yes,
it's not just like an easy thing to access and know exactly what the company.
It seems that transparent information doesn't flow very easily, right?
It doesn't.
Yeah, it's not that transparent.
And we hear about the bad first, right? That negative information, you know, there's some people doing research on the negative information about the negative impacts of products is far more to us. Like, there's some companies that do a lot of good, and because they've done something bad, they can't seem to get over that, and people don't know them. For like companies like Nike, after you know, after sweatshops, it's been very difficult for them to relay to the public what they do for the environment. So it's really difficult.
And the thing is that people still, I mean, it's a difficult thing to understand, because people, they say bad things about Nike wearing wearing Nike shoes on their feet, you know. So it's
we don't
so
want to
paradoxical. Especially young people like Generation Z, they are all for environment and they love this kind of narrative, but they buy it shame that Chinese. I mean, they shop a lot and they are all for sustainability, and maybe that's what young people do. They are full of contradictions. I mean, I
think we all are. And doing this research, I was like, this is the most disturbing research I've ever done, because we did some research like on the pork supply chain and different bread, chocolate, really in-depth studies about what's going on. And then when I found out that granite countertops are almost all of them have forced labor in them. Like you can't even get granite countertops. So I was like, I don't even have a choice if there's granite countertops somewhere where I'm living or at work. I mean, I was just like, wow, I had no idea that this is likely coming from, somewhere that definitely has negative impacts. I mean, everything from avocados to that kind of thing. So it has helped me change my habits some, but at this point, I haven't given up meat yet. But I'm like, to be a real champion of the environment, you can't eat.
No, you can't.
It's just not sustainable at all. So there's some things that even I am that contradiction, because I'm like, I just haven't done it yet. Like I just
love Kit Kat and Nestle products. I mean, how can you live without Kit Kat? It's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to give up chocolate. Oh, yeah. Definitely the contradictions, for sure.
That's a bad side of knowing too much, maybe, of studying so much. I mean, you get in conflict in so many moments. It's hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
Any other questions, guys? Silvio.
For me, just one question. What's the next? Because we are anxious for new papers like that.
Yeah, because the world has changed so much. I thought about it too, Silvio. The world has changed so much after pandemic. I mean, what's in store?
That's it.
Stacy, you want to talk about what's next or our work?
So I can start with like our trafficking, and then you can share any updates you want with your dissertation research. So I think with our trafficking research, we're trying to build on the momentum that we have, right? So we were able to get funding from the National Science Foundation, which is really prestigious in the United States, especially coming from a business school. It's pretty rare to have funding from them. And so we're trying to leverage that and apply for additional funding because it really helps us scale our research. We're able to tackle more interesting and larger questions and work with groups that are interdisciplinary. So we've made some great connections through our work so far with people in different fields and different backgrounds. And I think that's enriching our understanding of the topic, which is really exciting. The problem is when you're applying for grants, you don't have time to write papers and get those publications out. So I think that's kind of the challenge that we're fighting right now, is that, we're actually literally have a grant about to go out within 10 days that we're trying to get created, and then we have another one that we're going to be writing in the next couple of months. And so then it kind of keeps pushing off when the next paper can really start. So right now the challenge is we have so many topics and papers we want to write. It's getting the bandwidth and the time to write them, because we love this topic so much. We can't stop, really, even though we're not going to these training classes and doing the intensive field work. We still essentially are. I mean, as part of our National Science Foundation grant, we held a couple of workshops with, we created this multidisciplinary team of about 25 people from different academic areas, people in practice. So during these really intensive workshops, we're gaining a lot of insight and knowledge. So it's kind of like a field lab in a way, almost, right? So, I mean, it's in a controlled environment, but it's still getting a lot of perspective. So I think the hard part sometimes is deciding we've got to stop learning and start writing. So being very honest, like that's kind of the stage that we're in right now, is the little bit of writing we are doing is trying to propel the work forward, but we know we have to put some time on our agenda to actually write the papers and get more out. So we're working on it, but that's our challenge. It's like if we have momentum on the grant machine, we're trying to use that momentum to help us, because they're so hard to come by for us in business schools.
Stacy, I'm sure that we are available to help you to write.
Love it.
Stacy, it's a little comforting to know that you also spend a lot of time writing proposals, because over here sometimes I have the feeling that we only write proposals. And of course, when the funds are so small, You write a lot of proposals, and you hardly ever get any of them to be a successful proposal. So you have the feeling that you're really spending your energy in the proposals instead of working on your field's work anyway. Yeah.
And I think what's different for us in the United States is that within business schools, we're usually not expected to apply for funding. And so I think part of the challenge that we've had as well, at least I will say I've had, is, when you're the first one to break through the wall, so I'm the only person currently within our business school to have a National Science Foundation grant. No one knows how to deal with that. And so I'm kind of having to fight different battles and learn different things and teach other people things. So that's also been part of the effort, is just the execution and some of the administrative tasks that keep popping up that take away that productive time to, whether it's writing another proposal or writing a research paper or doing the field work that we want to do. There's these other things, like the day job gets in the way too, right? There's still other responsibilities that we have to perform. So I feel very fortunate that in the States, at least at this point in time, as a business school researcher, we don't have to apply for grants. We're at least able to do it because we want to do it. So that is much more enjoyable. I did have an environment at one point in time where it was basically you needed to write proposal after proposal, and that there's nothing rewarding or exciting about that, right? So I can certainly empathize with that position, but it is just a challenge because it's hard to get other things out if you're on the proposal machine and trying to get that done every day. Laurie, what's next for your work, or what do you feel is next for you or for us?
I've been trying to, the ethical consumption paper I'm working on, which I really, really love, is just now about to get submitted. So it's, I'm like, I'll see you in 2 years when that hopefully gets published. But there's been a lot of overlap. And so because this is taking so much of our time, and I keep coming to Stacy and going, I found another project, we should do this. So what I'm trying to do is really think strategically about what I can do, how that can help in multiple areas with getting me published, getting me tenure. Since I don't have that yet, Stacy has a little more freedom. But so what's next is trying to figure out how to keep the momentum going and how to ensure that the projects I'm working on really have some synergy to them, and that, like the work we're doing with online abuse and exploitation, well, that feeds into what we're looking at online with trafficking victims or labor trafficking victims. So along with our work with trafficking, we still are doing work on, Stacy and I, on online abuse and exploitation. And then, of course, I'm still doing work on ethical supply chains, and especially ethical consumption apps and ethical, or what I call social entrepreneurs. So.
Yeah, for the students who are writing their dissertations or theses, what Laurie said about, we have the paper is ready to be submitted. We'll hear about it in 2 years' time. That's something we have to get used to. That's the time frame for a paper to be reviewed and edited for publication. And many times, in fact, if the gatekeepers do not like our approach or our style or whatever, we end up in point zero again, where we have to start over, or we have to reframe our work. So yeah, just it's good for you to know that it's not something that you are the only ones that have to go through. Everyone goes through that, and any researcher has more rejections than acceptances in their life. That's something that we have to get used to. But the rejections many times are, of course, we have to be strong, but rejections are a possibility for us to better understand what the readers, those gatekeepers that are our first readers, what their impression was about our work. And they're the first ones that we have to convince, right? If we don't convince even them, maybe it's good that it's brought there, because otherwise we'll be shamed by others afterwards. It's better that someone already prevents work that's still not at its top level to go for any further, and so that we can polish it up and have it ready for a next attempt. But we do have to have a lot of energy for that, because otherwise, and this is why I think it's so great if we can arrange to work on topics that we are excited about, because then we're not going to be put down. I mean, someone may put us down, but we'll be able to stand up and keep going, because we believe on that. If we already don't believe in what we're doing, whenever someone tells us that it's no good, we accept that. And that's the case of many of our master and doctoral students that never get a publication. They don't try more than once, right?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of encouragement, definitely from Stacy and from others of my mentors that really push to submit stuff that I thought this will never get published, and now because Stacy pushed, it's getting published. So that's it's really good advice. And I find that I am the first conference paper we put out about trafficking. The reviews were horrible. I still don't know why they even published the paper, because I mean the reviews were just really offensive. And I was so offended by them, and it just.
But you know what happened there, Laurie? It seems that the reviewers didn't like it, but the editor did.
The editors did.
And sometimes it's good that you have an attentive editor that
Yes.
reads all the reviews and say, well, they didn't like it because of that, and I did like because of it.
Yeah, they were. It was really good because it was a social impact track, and I think they knew, and they sent it to people, to me, that didn't get the sense of the fit for the track or stuff like that. But I really learned so much from working with collaborators, especially those that have a lot of experience with editing and getting things published, because when we get reviews back, I'm just like, oh my gosh. And Stacy's like, here, we can address that. That's not a problem. We're going to address that. And so I've learned a lot. So those of you who haven't started doing that yet, it's not fun at first, but I've noticed the people that get people published, they just respond, and move forward. So I've really learned a lot from, especially from Stacy in that area.
It's not fun later either. Like responding to reviewers is not fun later either. But I do find that the review process, I can't think of a paper where it's made one worse. I do feel like the reviewers have helped papers to be better through that process. And I think we have to enter that process with some faith on that there is the ability to make it better. I do feel like there's been papers that have been rejected that maybe didn't get a fair shake, but some of those things where it's not that it necessarily gets easier. No one likes it whenever people tell you, we don't like your work, or your work's, we like everything, we like the title, but they basically change everything else, right? Like no one really enjoys doing those tasks, but I do think our work is stronger as a result of that process. And you have to kind of have that faith going in and be willing to accept criticism and kind of reflect and see how you can make your work better. And that continuous improvement mindset can help take you through those times, whether you're at the beginning of your career or later in your career like me, where it's like really yet another review or two giving us a problem. We all face it. So know that you're not alone whenever you have those moments.
Yeah, and one of the things that happen with reviewers, we have to think that reviewers are, in most of the cases, they're doing some volunteer work. And many times they're doing a volunteer work that has been assigned to them in a time that was not necessarily their best time, right? So they want to get rid of it. So if they find problems, they will point out the problems very soon, because that tells them that they could get rid of it and it's back to you. The problem is back with you. But a trick of a pragmatic guy here as well. If you, after you receive back this response from the reviewers with the things that they found that are problematic in your paper, if you address those things and then you write back to them, you even write a table in which you put, look, this is what you asked me to do, and this is how I addressed it. it will get to them in another time that is not very convenient to them. And many times, and I'm saying this is being pragmatic more than anything else, they will say, yes, this guy did what I asked him to, so it's fair that the paper is published. So if you believe in your work, it will be published, regardless of being a good paper or not, right? Sometimes it's not that good, but you're perseverant. So being perseverant is good, is important to be published. But at the same time, taking into account what reviewers and editors say is important to try and improve the paper. Because, of course, if you don't agree with what they're saying, you can just ignore it. Of course, if you ignore and resubmit to the same journal, there is a chance that they'll think that you're lazy, right? But sometimes you can ignore and explain why you're ignoring, and then they will accept. Other times they will say, well, maybe I just chose the wrong outlet and I have to try somewhere else. But if you trust in what you're doing, you will be published. It may take a little longer, but you'll get there. Guys, any other questions to our presenters of today? Angel, please.
No, it's another question. This is congratulations that Stacy and Larry is very important. It faces in real life with the information system. Do social impact, the impact available research, new information, technology use. It's very interesting, very interesting. The research counter and domestic sex traffic, behavior the human, thanks the great information for shows. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Anyone
you.
else? Oh, all right. Well, thank you very much, Stacy. Thank you very much, Laurie. You know that you're already part of the Latin American community now. We'll be calling you over and over because you know we over here many times we're not that. Let's say I'm probably one of the pragmatic engineers here, but we Latins are in general a little too flexible in things, and we don't fit the rules very well. But when we see that there are other people that break the rules in the sense that they do something different to what was being done before, and they succeed on that serves as a good example for us, and that motivates us. And I'm sure that you have a lot of followers here in this group and other people that these people here will influence in doing some more responsible research in the future. So thank you very much, the two of you. Thank you. And I would like to very quickly just tell you about our last event of the year. Next week, it is going to be our 17th research seminar for the year. And it's going to be with Professor Steve Alter. He's going to talk to us about, of course, the work system perspective. He asked me what we would like him to talk about. And I said, you know, I mean, we think of you and we think about the work system. It is an interesting approach that I feel that sometimes has been overshadowed by some other ways of thinking of the introduction of information systems in organizations. But it definitely has explanations for phenomena that other models do not provide us with. So I think it's going to be very interesting. I hope you can all join us next week. Stacy and Laurie, thank you very much again. Hope to see you in one of the LACAIS events in the future again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah.